Hey guys, tonight we descend into a cold, flickering world of candlelit desks, aching joints, and the quiet muttering of monks who've just spilled ink for the sixth time today. You're in a stone-walled scriptorium, now huddled under layers of itchy wool, and the parchment before you smells faintly of livestock. Somewhere to your left, Brother Alric lets out an aggrieved sigh, which you ignore because you've got bigger problems. You shift in your creaky wooden chair, one of the many luxuries carved lovingly by someone who clearly never had to sit in it for 16 hours straight. Your fingers are cramped around a goose quill that is almost sharpened properly, but not quite. You should stop and fix it, but if you do, you'll lose your place in this endless treatise on St. Eustace's obscure miracles, one of which, if you recall correctly, involved converting a deer. That deer had a better day than you're having. The candle, stubby and unpredictable, throws more shadow than light. You lean in too far, just as the wax finally topples, searing a slow, hissing trail across your wrist. You don't cry out, "This is a holy place," but your eyebrows do rise dramatically. Brother Alric smirks. You resolve to scrape something unflattering about him into the margin later. The room smells of damp stone mildew and boiled turnips. The lunch you're still regretting. There's also a subtle scent of parchment glue and something that may or may not be rodent-related. Cold air snakes through the cracks in the wall, despite the heavy tapestries depicting apocalyptic biblical visions. Apparently, even the four horsemen can't stop a draft. Your fingers have gone numb, which might be a blessing. Less feeling means fewer complaints, as you continue the laborious process of copying script so small it could double as ant footprints. You pause to crack your knuckles, a sinful noise, in a room dedicated to silence. Somewhere across the hall, someone coughs in Latin. You are, as it turns out, part of a long tradition of scribes quietly losing their minds at work. Most of your predecessors were just as grumpy. In fact, one left a note in the margin of a 9th century Irish manuscript that reads, "St. Patrick, deliver me from writing." Another simply wrote, "Oh, my hand," with the drama of a man composing his final will. Your candle sputters ominously. You glance up at the narrow window, too high to see through, but still radiating the kind of gray that suggests it's either dawn or the sun has given up. There are at least 40 folios left today. Your back already feels like it's been personally judged by God. The only warmth comes from the slow burn of irritation. You fantasize about standing, stretching, perhaps even walking. But the last time someone did that, the abbot compared it to sloth and handed them a heavier pen. So you stay hunched, faithful to your duty, and you're developing hunchback. Historians still argue whether scribes found joy in their task or merely endured it for divine brownie points. The truth is probably both. Monks weren't supposed to complain aloud, so they did it creatively in tiny script, in margins, in hidden snark, nestled between psalms and prophecies. You finally reach the bottom of the page, only to realize you've forgotten a line halfway through. You stare at it. It stares back. There is no easy fix. You could scrape the ink off, but that risks tearing the page. You could add it at the bottom, but that'll ruin the alignment. You could cry, but tears smear ink. You opt instead for quiet despair and a brief prayer to St. Jerome, patron of translators, and people barely holding it together. And still, somehow there's something meditative about the repetition. The wax, the cold, the numbness, they fade into background noise. You fall into a rhythm. You are ink. You are letter. You are the semi-legible bridge between divine wisdom and the illiterate masses. Until, of course, you realize that your ink has dried mid-sentence. Again, the ink. Oh, the ink. If the candle wax is your physical tormentor, the ink is your psychological nemesis. You stare down at the now brittle pool in your inkwell, hoping that if you tilt it a little and squint like an optimist, there will be enough left to finish this sentence. There isn't. There never is. You sigh a long-defeated sort of sigh that only fellow scribes understand, and rise with the grace of someone who's just realized their leg has fallen asleep. You hobble over to the communal ink station, a rickety table, stained with the dreams of manuscripts past. The smell hits you first, sharp, tangy, almost metallic. A mixture of oak gall iron sulfate and the tears of whoever prepared it last. Back at your desk, you grip your quill like a knight taking up his sword. Except your sword is made from a goose and is prone to collapsing at the slightest provocation. You test it on a scrap of parchment. The line looks fine, almost elegant. You feel hope. Then you try to write. The nib splits. Of course it does. Your fingers twitch as you reach for the penknife. Not for violence, though, it's tempting, but for sharpening. This is the part no one ever talks about. In illuminated manuscript appreciation, the relentless, infuriating maintenance of tools. Quills need to be shaped like delicate sabers angled just so, or they'll either tear the vellum or explode like inky fireworks. You start carving, gently, slowly, a little more off the left edge. Too much. Now it's uneven. You sigh again, a sigh deep enough to shift tectonic plates and start over. It takes 3 tries, but eventually, you get something that won't betray you the moment it touches the page. The first line flows. The second almost silky. You begin to relax just a little. The ink glides across the parchment like melted licorice, leaving behind sharp Latin letters with satisfying precision. Then a fly lands in your inkwell. You stare at it, it stares back. You consider baptizing it in the name of the Father, the Son, and whatever saint deals with insects, then call it even. But instead you fish it out with a dry end of your quill, watching it leave tiny black legs behind, like a modernist signature. You move on. The goose quill is, to its credit, a marvel of medieval engineering. Plucked from the right part of the wing, hardened, cleaned, and cut with surgical attention, it can glide for hours when it behaves, but it never wants to. You envy the scribes of Constantinople, who got fancy reed pens and finer parchment. You wonder if they envied you for your climate. Probably not. Historians still debate how often scribes prepared their own tools versus receiving them from specialized stationers. But complaints about quills show up across centuries. One 14th century scribe in England scrawled, "The pen is bad, the parchment worse," while another added simply, "That's enough for today. My hand is tired. Yours is too." You flex your fingers. They crack like firewood. The cold doesn't help. The joints feel like someone stuffed gravel inside them during matins. You envy Brother Hugo, who just copied musical notations all day, thick lines and gentle notes. No footnotes, no marginalia, no fuss. You're back in the rhythm now. The ink flows, the lines straighten, the Latin mostly makes sense. You briefly imagine someone reading your work 100 years from now, admiring your steady hand, your elegant letters, your obvious genius. Then you smudge an entire paragraph with your palm. It's one of those mistakes that starts small and then explodes. The ink wasn't dry. Your hand dragged across it. You try to stop. You freeze. But it's too late. The words smear into a Rorschach test of guilt. A scribe's worst nightmare, visible error. You grab a knife again, not violently, and begin the delicate process of scraping. The parchment fights back the calfskin grain, resisting your touch. You shave off just enough to remove the stain without breaking the page. It's like surgery for shame. Once it's flat again, you breathe. Victory. Then, with excruciating care, you re-letter the ruined line. And hope the abbot isn't feeling petty today. You dip the quill again. This time it holds. Your candle flickers. Not much wax left. You'll have to work in semi-dark soon, a process you've nicknamed guess and bless. Guess the words, bless the outcome. Still you keep going. One more page. Just one more. You pull your rough woolen robe tighter around your shoulders, trying to trap the last shreds of warmth before they escape into the unforgiving monastery air. It's barely mid-morning, but your breath is already visible. Tiny clouds of monkish misery curling up toward the stone ceiling. The scriptorium is a cavern of chill, a place where warmth comes only from friction. And nobody's moving fast enough for that. The fire in the corner, if it can be called that, is less of a blaze and more of a slow emotional breakdown made of damp logs. It sputters and smokes, offering heat to no one and judgment to all. You contemplate warming your hands over it, but remember what happened last time. Brother Martin pushed in too close and set his sleeve alight. The manuscript survived. His pride did not. You shift again on your wooden stool. It creaks ominously, like it's just waiting for the right moment to betray you. Your lower back issues a quiet complaint in medieval Latin. You ignore it. There are pages to copy, and complaints won't stop St. Augustine from needing to be painstakingly handwritten for the 50th time. Across the room, Brother Jerome clears his throat. Loudly, then again, you shoot him a look. He shrugs as if to say, I'm dying of cold and cabbage. You both are. The monastery diet doesn't exactly foster warmth. Last night's supper consisted of overboiled cabbage, underboiled cabbage, and a single suspiciously firm turnip. You're still digesting it in shifts. Still you press on. Your ink has settled into a nice slow consistency, the kind that suggests the temperature has stabilized just above freezing. You draw the first letter of the day with exaggerated care, mostly so you don't have to move again too soon. It's a capital G in that big fancy Carolingian hand, the kind that lets you pretend for 5 seconds that this job might actually impress someone, maybe even God. You pause to flex your fingers. One refuses to straighten. That's fine. You name it Saint Krampus and move on. Historians still argue whether these monastic scriptoria were deliberately unheeded to enhance discipline or simply underfunded to the point of cruelty. But most agree scribes worked in brutal cold, often with gloves cut open at the fingers so they could hold a quill, while the rest of their hands turned into frostbitten relics. You look out the tiny high window again. The sky is an indifferent smear of gray. Somewhere beyond the walls, friars are walking. In the woods collecting firewood, talking to birds, possibly experiencing minor spiritual awakenings. You meanwhile are starting your 3rd page of On the Nature of Heresies. You're halfway through when the ink begins to freeze. Not all at once, just the edges like a dessert left too long in the monastery larder. You gently warm the inkwell with your hand, pretending not to notice the purple stain creeping up your palm. Cold ink thickens. Thick ink clots, and clotting ink ruins lines. So you hum softly, rebelliously a secular tune, just enough to annoy Brother Jerome, whose brow furrows with pious confusion. You've reached the point where the cold no longer registers as pain. It's just the backdrop to your existence. like the smell of wet stone or the constant accusatory ticking of Brother Thomas's hourglass. And yet, there's a strange calm to it all. The repetition, the quiet, the distant sound of sheep being unimpressed with the weather, the scratch of quill on parchment. It becomes a kind of rhythm, like the world has narrowed down to this one desk, this one letter, this moment. Your breath, the ink, the lines, everything syncs up until someone sneezes behind you. Violently, you flinch, your quill jerks. And now your very solemn paragraph about divine wrath contains what can only be described as a surprise mustache on the letter B. You contemplate starting over, but the ink's too dark, the parchment too expensive, and honestly, your enthusiasm is stored safely at absolute zero. So you write on, noting quietly that if anyone asks, the mark is decorative. Later, during midday prayer, you catch sight of Brother Jerome trying to hide a snort. He's seen it. You'll repay him in kind, perhaps, by accidentally swapping his ink with berry juice. Again, monastic life is many things. Serene is not one of them. It's cold, it's dull. It's a full-body exercise in ascetic patience. But it's also oddly intimate, everyone freezing, everyone muttering, everyone collectively enduring. A routine so rigid it could be mistaken for piety. By late afternoon, your fingers have become strangers. You poke them with your quill to make sure they're still alive. Barely. The pages stack slowly beside you like a growing burden of obedience. You consider them a quiet monument to your suffering. Maybe someday someone will praise the scribe who preserved this work. Maybe they'll imagine him noble, inspired. You smile faintly. You know better. You press your palm flat against the vellum, trying to convince it to stop curling like it's reacting to an insult. It's not cooperating. This particular sheet seems to have come from a calf with a real attitude problem, probably one that kicked the bucket angry at the world and carried that energy straight into its afterlife as writing material. The vellum crinkles under your fingers, resisting like a sulking child. You flip it over. No better. This side buckles too, with a ridge that runs right across where your rubric is supposed to go. Great. Nothing like a manuscript that looks like it was written on the back of a stubborn mountain goat. You grab the bone folder and begin smoothing. Slow, deliberate strokes. Over and over. This isn't writing anymore. This is animal husbandry with ink. The more you press, the more the surface crackles. Like old bread crust, every scribe dreams of the perfect vellum flat firm blank as divine possibility. But you get the rejects, the offcuts, the oh well close enough pieces that sigh when you touch them. You dip your quill. The ink pools for a moment, then seeps into the uneven grain, blooming into a dark blur like spilled wine. You sigh. Again. This vellum hates you. You suspect it hated the parchmenter too. Historians still argue over how much of the parchment process scribes were involved in. But one thing's clear: when things went wrong, they were stuck dealing with the consequences. Stretch marks from the frame, grease spots, faint blue veins that no amount of chalk could disguise. One manuscript from the 13th century even includes the line, "I am being forced to write on hide full of holes." You glance down. Yours isn't full of holes, but there's one in the corner that looks like a tiny demon mouth. You decide to work around it, perhaps a decorative O, as you begin to write your quill snags. The surface is inconsistent. Some parts absorb ink, like gossip in a priory. Others repel it, like you've just tried to insult St. Peter. You adjust pressure, adjust angle, whisper threats. The parchment doesn't care. It has transcended obedience. You fantasize about papyrus. Oh, smooth, linear Egyptian papyrus, how simple your surface must be. But papyrus is for warm climates and distant times. You are here in a drafty stone box with the ghost of a moody calf under your hand. The room is silent, save for the scratching of pens and the occasional creak of someone's spine. Remembering what freedom felt like, you stare at the next page in your stack. It's translucent in places, clearly from a younger calf, not yet matured thin enough to question its mortality. Still, you press on. You trace the capital letter with the kind of reverence normally reserved for relics and hot soup. It's a big A today, looped and ornate. You hesitate at the base of the curve. If you press too hard, the vellum will tear. If you press too light, the line will fade, and someone will accuse you of laziness during Vespers. The perfect balance. That's the trick. You finish the letter, no split, no smudge, small victories. Then you look at the margin. It's crooked. You lean back. The vellum curls again, as if mocking you. You flatten it with your elbow and keep going. The words look decent. Not inspired, but not humiliating either. You'll take it. As the hours drag on, your mind wanders. How many cows did it take to make this book 1020? You're not sure. You imagine a pastoral scene, dozens of medieval cows standing in line, mooing judgmentally, waiting to become literature. You chuckle softly. Brother Thomas gives you a look. You cough, adjust your robe, and pretend to pray. You think about the parchment again. It squeaks under your quill. Yes, it literally squeaks, and you realize this sheet might still contain faint remnants of hair follicles. You consider naming this one Patchy. It seems fitting. Sometimes the vellum reacts with the ink in unpredictable ways. Maybe it wasn't cleaned thoroughly. Maybe it still harbors resentment. Whatever the reason, some lines take on a silvery sheen, others fade like regret. You'll need to go over them again later, possibly by candlelight, possibly while weeping. By late afternoon, you reach a page that behaves. Smooth, supple, gentle. You whisper thanks to whatever divine being blessed this particular bovine. You write faster, more fluid. You start to believe, just for a moment, that this might be enjoyable. Then your elbow knocks over the inkpot. You freeze. It tips, but by some miracle, possibly divine, possibly sheer luck, it stops short of your page. Just a dark puddle on the table. You clean it quickly with the hem of your robe. The ink stains. The robe was already ruined. You return to your work. The curl of the vellum has eased. Or maybe you've just stopped noticing. You lean in closer, the flickering light casting shadows that blur the text, forcing you to rely on memory. You've copied this section before. You could recite it in your sleep. You probably do, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. You've been staring at the same word for so long, it starts to unravel. Sanctificator. Does that even look real anymore? You blink. Nope. Still just a wiggly worm of Latin, looped with pious confusion. You blink again and rest your head in your hands' elbows, sinking into the splintering desk. The scriptorium is quiet, eerily so. No one's coughing, no one's sneezing. Even Brother Jerome isn't passive-aggressively clearing his throat. It's just you, your quill, the flicker of failing candlelight, and the slow creeping boredom that begins to gnaw at the edges of your very soul. You're working on a particularly dry passage from a text called The Lives of Lesser-Known Saints. And lesser-known is a kind way of saying no one's ever heard of these people, possibly not even God. You're halfway through the tale of Saint Wilbert, who apparently converted 5 people and a goat before dying in a well. That's it. That's the story. You yawn, not the delicate kind, but the kind that folds your spine backward and cracks your jaw like thunder. It echoes in the stone room, and for a moment you're sure the abbot is going to burst in and accuse you of sloth. But no. All is still. You scribble another line. The ink now smells like it's going off fermented. Sharp a little too ambitious for your liking. You dip the quill again and keep going. Saint Vilbert is now surviving on nettle soup and holy indignation. Riveting. And then the cabbage kicks in. A slow internal shift. A rumble. You regret everything. Medieval diets didn't leave room for excitement. Mostly grains, sometimes fish, often boiled vegetables, always repetition. Today's lunch was predictably cabbage, again, boiled until its soul left its body, and maybe yours too. You shift on your stool trying to avoid the inevitable, but the stool creaks, and you're reminded that everything, even your furniture, is judging you. You let out the smallest, most prayerful sigh. This is the moment boredom becomes spiritual. You are no longer just tired, you are transcending into a realm of divine tedium. Saint Vilbert is now building a small wooden cross in a thunderstorm. You start sketching a very dramatic lightning bolt in the margin just to stay awake. Historians still debate whether monks found any creative satisfaction in their work or simply channeled their cabin fever into exaggerated illuminations. The truth is often buried in the margins literally. There among the vines and saints you find dragons with human faces, snails fighting knights, cats playing harps and rabbits, doing deeply questionable things. You pause and draw a small snail with a smug expression beside St. Vilbert's name. You feel better. Then you remember the abbot does check margins. You hastily scrape it off. This life is devotion, and devotion you're learning is 90%. Copying things you already wrote last week, and 10% not setting anything on fire. You sip the dregs of your cold barley tea, pretend it's wine, and squint at the next page. This saint's name is even worse. Saint Ludegrance Ludivine Ludahu. You stop caring halfway through and just write Ludo. He's fasting in a cave, probably alone. Probably also bored. You imagine him sitting there, eyes closed, trying not to fall asleep. While demons whisper tax codes at him, you relate deeply. The candles flicker again. Brother Thomas shuffles by with more wax. You nod your thanks. He nods back like a man who has stared directly into the abyss and found more cabbage. Still you keep going. You copy another miracle. A sick man sees a vision, then coughs up a glowing frog. You pause, reread the line, and decide to leave it. Who are you to question sacred amphibians? Your wrist cramps. You roll it, crack your knuckles. You've developed a strange lump on your middle finger scribe's bump. It's the most exciting thing to happen to your anatomy all month. Somewhere outside, bells toll for none the afternoon prayer. You think about pretending you didn't hear them, but skipping prayer would earn you a lecture about discipline and probably an extra page of Saint Vilbert and his goat. You rise, your knees crack like old wood. You join the others in the chapel, voices droning in slow Gregorian unity. The chant washes over you like warm soup, dull, repetitive, oddly comforting. You return to your desk. The parchment curls again. The candle hisses, the quill frays. You smile faintly. This is your life, and you're getting really, really good at it. You pause quill midair, staring at the word miraculum. Is that one C or two? You've seen it both ways today. Actually, you've written it both ways today. 3 times. On the same page, you feel the small sting of creeping madness and maybe divine judgment as you realize no one ever agreed on how to spell anything. This is the scribal life, a daily exercise in grammatical roulette. There are no dictionaries, no handy red squiggly lines. Just vibes and a vague memory of how Brother Odo wrote it last Lent. You think. Maybe. You reread the sentence, it still works, probably, you move on. Latin, it turns out, is a language that resists consistency, with the same enthusiasm you resist boiled turnips. Regional spellings, inconsistent abbreviations, and erratic orthography mean that half the time you're basically guessing. The other half, you're copying someone else's guess from 200 years ago, and then there's the punctuation, or rather the lack of it. Medieval scribes weren't exactly fans of commas or quotation marks. Why pause for breath when you can just barrel through an entire miracle story in one glorious unpunctuated chant of confusion? You try to add a period, or what passes for one, usually just a dot, floating like a sad little island in a sea of text. But even that feels like rebellion. You erase it. Historians still debate when standardized spelling began to take hold, and most agree it wasn't in your century. Some even argue that uniform spelling was seen as unimportant as long as the reader understood the meaning. Which would be comforting, except the reader is probably just as confused as you are. You come across a particularly perplexing sentence. It involves a martyr, a loaf of bread, and something that might be either divine light or actual fire. You reread it 3 times. It doesn't help. You write it anyway, hedging your bets with a flourish on the capital D. If it's a mistake, at least it'll look confident. Across the desk, Brother Hugo is mumbling, loudly, probably conjugating verbs out loud again. You consider throwing a parchment scrap at him. You don't. But you do spell Benedictus with an extra E in silent protest. You look down at your work. Miraculum. No. That one is definitely wrong. You groan softly, take the knife, and start scraping. The ink has dried. The vellum resists. You flake away. The mistake letter by letter, like peeling regret off a sheep. Eventually, the surface is clean enough to rewrite the word. This time you pick the version with the most flair. That counts for something. It's moments like this that you realize how fragile medieval manuscripts truly are. Not just physically, though they are, and your sleeve has nearly erased 2 pages just this week, but intellectually, every copied page is a game of historical telephone played over centuries. Miss one letter, and a village gets wrongly damned. Still, you continue. You write Episcopus, then pause. Episcopus. You shake your head and scratch it out. This is the scribal curse. You're not just writing, you're choosing. And those choices might outlive you. You suddenly remember a note you read in another manuscript. A scribe had written a curse upon the scribe, who copies this incorrectly. You consider adding your own a blessing upon the reader who doesn't notice. Midway through the next folio, the letters start to blur. Not because your ink has gone bad, but because your eyes are staging a full rebellion. You blink rapidly, splash some water on your face, and pretend it helps. You wish not for the first time that you could just write in your own native tongue. But no, this must be Latin, sacred Latin. The Latin of Cicero, of Augustine, of people who clearly never tried writing it for 16 hours with a goose feather. Even spoken Latin changes depending on who you ask. Some monks pronounce their VS like WS. Others insist on a harsh C sound in every word. One particularly insufferable brother insists on Kyrie, as if he's personally auditioning for an early music ensemble. You roll your eyes just thinking about it. You return to the page. There's a joy, though, in the occasional word that flows just right. Veritas, lumen, gratia. They sparkle even now. You linger on those as if their meaning alone carries heat. Then you get to concupiscentia. You hate concupiscentia. You spell it wrong twice. You scrape again. You rewrite again. You sigh again. Eventually, the words start to settle. You find your rhythm. Your pen glides. The letters line up like tiny soldiers in a holy army, marching across the skin of a long-dead calf. You relax. Maybe today won't be so bad. Then Brother Jerome sneezes so hard he knocks over your inkwell. Of course he does. You know what the margins are really for complaining. Not footnotes, not commentary, not cute theological clarifications. Just pure distilled frustration. The kind of holy venting that makes you wonder if monks were passive-aggressive pioneers ahead of their time. You've done it too. Everyone does. A quick scribble in the corner, something like, "It's raining again," or "Dear Lord." Why this many begats you think no one will notice, except now you're reading a manuscript from 2 centuries ago. And guess what? That scribe did the same thing. He wrote in very tidy, Carolingian minuscule, "Writing bores me." And just below that, the ink is thin. Then a few lines later, "I am cold. I am very cold." You feel a kinship across the ages. The margins are your therapy. They're the tiny padded room inside your already padded room. And sure, you're supposed to be copying sacred texts with the reverence of a man handcrafting divine wisdom. But sometimes the divine wisdom includes a very discreet doodle of a snail jousting with a bishop. You glance at your own manuscript. In the lower right, just above the chapter on penance, you've drawn a frog with a halo. You tell yourself it's symbolic, very theological. Perhaps it represents baptism. Historians still argue whether marginalia had deeper meaning or were just scribal mischief. Some say the drawings reflected cultural anxieties. Others say the scribes were simply losing their minds one psalm at a time. Both seem plausible, especially the second. Today you're back to copying hagiographies. Those endless saint biographies, all filled with suspiciously similar story arcs. Noble birth, vision, persecution, miracles involving animals. You swear of them raised the same dead guy, or at least shared a camel. You finish a sentence about St. Cuthbert calming a storm, then immediately write in the margin "wind, still loud." It's true. There's a draft that makes your candle lean like it's considering early retirement. The margins give you power. You can't speak aloud. You can't disrupt the holy hush of the scriptorium. But here in these tiny gaps between lines, you can leave your mark. You can whisper to the future, to another poor soul like yourself, who will one day read this and smile. You pause to admire the artistry of a fellow scribe from another book. A tiny man rides a fish. Another margin shows a monk being chased by a giant chicken. Why, no one knows, but you feel seen. Sometimes you write little notes about the text itself. This part is badly written. This contradicts the earlier passage. Once in a fit of honesty, you even wrote unclear. Probably nonsense. You hope that doesn't get you excommunicated, but if it does, maybe they'll give you warmer robes in hell. You make it through the next few pages with minimal incident. Your ink behaves, your quill only splits once. The vellum isn't actively hostile. You feel good, You feel almost competent. Then you realize you've skipped a line. You stare in horror. The realization seeps into your bones like the monastery chill. It's not a small omission either. It's a full sentence, a key sentence. One with a saint's name and a miracle and something about a flaming hand. You have 3 options. Scrape back to where it should have gone and try to cram it in. Leave it out and hope the bishop doesn't read Latin that well. Add it in the margin, pray for forgiveness, and hope nobody notices. You choose option 3. Carefully, lovingly, you write the missing line in the edge space, curling the letters so they mimic the main script. Then you add a little pointer, a delicate hand with a single accusing finger to show where it belongs. Marginalia to the rescue again. It's not perfect, but it's yours. And that counts for something. You glance over your growing stack of folios. Dozens of pages each, a tapestry of effort, precision, and controlled existential crisis. Some are cleaner than others. Some bear scars of error and correction. And in many, tucked into corners and curves, are your whispered complaints, jokes, and the occasional, snarky comment about the weather. It's a strange kind of immortality. You imagine some future scholar peering into your notes and chuckling softly. Maybe they'll feel what you feel now, a connection to the person behind the pen. A recognition of shared humanity across time, ink, and aching fingers. You smile. Then you draw a small cat chasing a bishop, because theology is serious work. But the margins, they're where the soul stretches its legs. It always starts the same way, one bad stroke. One momentary lapse in attention. One sneaky curve in a letter that turns a Q into a G or a V into a very judgmental R. Then you spot it too late, of course, and your stomach drops like a poorly sealed reliquary. You've made a mistake, a visible one. And in this particular manuscript that's tantamount to heresy, you sit still for a moment, just staring at the error like it might fix itself out of shame. It doesn't. It's bold, obnoxious, almost proud. Now begins the delicate dance of correction. First you reach for the knife, not the sharp one you fantasize about throwing at Brother Hugo, but the gentler one, the scraper. The one designed to lift away the top layer of parchment without tearing it if you're lucky. You scrape, slowly, like peeling the regret off your soul. It mostly works, except now the vellum underneath is a slightly different color and texture. Like you've uncovered a pale scar. You'll have to write smaller to fit the word back in. Smaller and cleaner. With trembling hands and the spiritual support of St. Jude, patron of lost causes. You manage it, barely. You keep going. Then halfway down the next column, it happens again. Your eye twitches. This time it's a miswritten name. You wrote Marcus instead of Martinus, a different saint entirely. One was a bishop, the other a hermit who talked to geese. Big difference. You curse silently, not with real curses, those get you flagged by Brother Jerome, but with a full sentence of internalized despair. Something like, "Oh, sacred baloney." Then you scrape again. The skin is wearing thin. So is your patience. Historians still debate whether scribes were expected to be perfect, or just close enough that no one noticed. Some monasteries demanded full do-overs for even small errors. Others accepted corrections as long as they didn't alter the sacred meaning. But all agreed on one thing: don't mess up the names. You try to keep calm, breathe, ink, write, then smudge. You have smudged the tail of a Y. It now looks like a G that gave up halfway through a gym session. You stare at it. Could you pass it off as stylistic unlikely? This bishop loved clean lines and hated ambiguity. You know, he told you, loudly, in front of the whole scriptorium, twice. You scrape again and again. Your knife is getting dull. You consider sharpening it with your teeth. The next paragraph comes easier. You're back in rhythm like a monk machine. Until the quill splinters, mid-sentence. The nib peels apart like a poorly made pastry, and you leave a blot the size of Saint Benedict's humility. You reach for another quill. It's too short. The next one's too soft. The third is bent. You pick the best of the worst and dip carefully. Your hand hovers over the page like a nervous falcon. You start again. Effectivement, you finish the line without further disaster. But now your elbow aches. Not a regular ache either. A dull thudding weight that pulses up into your shoulder like a divine reminder that this is your penance. Scribes get no glory, no name, no thanks. Just tendinitis and hope that someone in the future might glance at your work and think, decent kerning. You stretch. Your spine pops. Brother Hugo glares at you over the top of his manuscript. You consider scrawling "Tell Hugo" to mind his own ink in your next margin. You resist, barely. Then, without warning, your desk wobbles. A tremor. Someone bumped the leg again, probably Brother Jerome, with his overzealous posture. Your candle shakes, you flinch, and your quill midward jerks. A line is ruined, again. You don't scream. You don't weep. You just press your hands together and pray for divine patience, or an earthquake, whichever comes first. You patch the line the best you can. The blotch becomes part of a decorative loop. The waver in the ink is now artistic flair. You know it's a lie. God knows it's a lie. But it's neat enough to pass. The corrections build up. Not a flood, but a slow, constant drip. A scraped word here, a blot there, a marginal note clarifying that no, really, this is supposed to say blessed fire, not blistered friar. You begin to understand why some scribes left notes begging future readers for mercy. Your fingers cramp again. You shake them out. Glance at your stack of pages. You're barely halfway through the day's quota. But hey, at least you haven't torn anything in 2 weeks. You touch your knife. You touch your ink. You glance at the blot you now call Saint Blobula. Then you pick up your quill, and you keep going, because no one else will. The words echo in your skull. Now psalm after psalm, rhythm after rhythm, line after line of holy repetition that turns your thoughts into mush and your memory into something squishy and Gregorian. You're on your 6th hour today of copying the Psalter. Yes, that Psalter. The one with 150 psalms, most of which seem obsessed with 3 things enemies smiting, and how incredibly awesome God is at both weather and vengeance. You've written, "Let all the earth fear the Lord," so many times that if the earth isn't afraid, yet you'll personally walk outside and shake it. Your lips move silently as you copy. You don't even mean to anymore. The rhythm just takes you. The Latin flows like a hymn from muscle memory. Dominus illuminatio mea. You murmur, not even sure what you're saying anymore. Probably something about light enemy's mercy. The greatest hits. The candle flickers. The lines on the page shimmer. For a second, you wonder if you're still awake, or if this is just Psalm Dream the Beerjabri 17, where you're floating in a field of singing sheep, while David plays harp solos from behind a burning bush. It's happened before. You pause, shake your head, take a sip of barley tea. It's cold, of course. Everything is cold, except the part of your wrist that's developed friction burn from rubbing the vellum over and over again. You turn the page and your heart drops. It's Psalm 119, the long one. The really, really long one. Each verse starts with a different Hebrew letter. There are 176 lines. That's not a psalm. That's a marathon. That's a liturgical hostage situation. You take a deep breath, square your shoulders, and begin. Aleph. Beati makulati via. Here we go. Historians still argue whether scribes entered a kind of meditative state during these long sessions, or whether they were just slowly ascending into divine-induced brain fog. You lean toward the fog theory. It's not spiritual, it's survival. Somewhere to your left, Brother Thomas dozes chin on his collarbone, snoring like a dying bagpipe. You envy him deeply, but you can't afford to stop. You still have 50 lines before the next break. And God help you if you fall behind. The abbot counts pages, literally. The repetition grinds your mind into strange shapes. You start to find patterns in the spacing between words. You notice a smudge on line 3 of Psalm 118, and wonder if that was a sneeze, a blot, or the mark of another scribe from decades ago. You're so deep in this psalm hole that even the phrase statutes of the Lord makes your eye twitch. You start making mental substitutions just to entertain yourself. Blessed are the undefiled in the way becomes. Blessed are those who remembered to bring a cushion. Make me to understand the way of thy precepts becomes. Make me to understand why I still don't have lunch. You get bolder. You add a small doodle, a tiny foot next to the line. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. It's subtle. It's tasteful. It's probably blasphemous. But it's the only thing keeping you upright. Your hand cramps. You flex it. You've developed an entirely new grip style you call the claw of St. Carpal. It's not ergonomic, but it is holding your quill without dropping it, so you'll take it. Outside rain begins to fall. You can't see it, but the smell of wet stone intensifies, and the room darkens just enough that you start contemplating how many psalms you could get through by candlelight before you go blind. You think about David, the supposed author of these psalms. He was a shepherd, a musician, a king. You wonder if he had to repeat himself this much. Probably not. He had scribes for that. You write another verse about crying unto the Lord with your whole heart and resisting the wicked. Your stomach growls. You're not sure which side of that verse you're on. You get through 20 lines, then 40, then 60. At this point, time doesn't exist. Only psalms, only precepts, only commandments that must be followed and copied and praised and preserved. Your head droops, your vision blurs, you keep writing. 80 lines, 90, 100. The verses blur into a chant, into a whisper, into the scratch of ink on vellum, and the quiet sound of your own breathing in rhythm with the candle's flicker. You reach line 176. You stare at it. You write it. Then you set your quill down, and you exhale. Your fingers are numb. Your spine is curled like a medieval question mark. But you did it. You conquered Psalm 119. You may never be the same. You wake up to coughing. Not a gentle, polite little ahem, but the wet, gut-deep hacking of someone losing a lung, and probably their copy of the Book of Hours at the same time. It echoes through the cold stone hall like a bell tolling for productivity. You don't even look up. You know the sound. It's Brother Petrus. Again. You say a quiet prayer for him, not out of piety, but because if he goes down, you'll be next in line for his unfinished folios. The plague is making the rounds again. Not the plague, but one of those small, coughing, sweating, bad stew-colored ones that the monastery pretends isn't a big deal, until the abbot suddenly declares a 3-day fast and someone starts writing mass cards. You cough once to check. Nope. Still healthy for now. You dip your quill in the ink and keep going. You're behind schedule. The bishop wants his book of hours before Easter, which is only 3 weeks away. Maybe 4, depending on the moon. You'd look it up if you weren't neck-deep in copying the Litany of the Saints for the 7th time. This version has an extra 12 saints. You suspect they were added just to punish you. Sancte eleutheri ora pro nobis. You write it again. The margins are filling up, not with complaints this time, but with record-keeping. Who's coughing? Who's out? Who's been reassigned to kitchen duty because their lungs have betrayed them? You sketch a small skull in one corner, not as a joke, just as a quiet nod to reality. Historians still debate how deeply pandemics affected daily scribal work. Some argue scriptoria slowed to a crawl. Others say monks simply worked around the bodies. The truth is probably both and worse. Monastic life didn't stop. It staggered, but the deadlines stayed. Brother Hugo is wearing 2 robes today and still shivering. You don't ask why, you know why. Half the scriptorium smells like vinegar and herbs. Someone's hung onions in the window again. Not for seasoning, for warding off bad air, as if an onion ever stopped a virus. But it's tradition, and tradition is half the job. You pause to sneeze, quietly. You look around to make sure no one noticed. They did. Brother Jerome eyes you with the judgment of a man who thinks disease is a moral failing. You wipe your nose on your sleeve and keep writing. If you're going down, you're taking Psalm 45 with you. The pressure is constant. You're behind because 2 scribes were sent to the infirmary, and 1 was reassigned to copying burial records. That leaves you with triple the workload and none of the extra daylight. Your hands tremble, not from illness yet, but from the sheer volume of text, the Psalter, the hours of the Virgin, the Passion readings, the calendar of feasts. It never ends. You can't stop. If you stop, someone else has to pick it up. And you've seen what Brother Thomas's handwriting looks like under stress. It's less sacred scripture and more possessed chicken. And besides, you're fine, totally fine. Just a little warm, just a little lightheaded. You open a small window above your desk. Fresh air rushes in cold bracing. Slightly cabbage-scented from the refectory below. You breathe deeply, immediately regret it, cough again. Okay, maybe not totally fine. You look at your page. A smear trails across the bottom. You check your sleeve. Ink, not blood. Good. You wipe it off and pretend it never happened. This is what it means to be a scribe during a pandemic. Keep going, keep your distance, keep your inkpot covered, and pray. Not for health, no one's that optimistic, but for enough time to finish your work before your lungs revolt. The weirdest part. The routine doesn't change. The bell still rings for prayer. The abbot still grumbles about margins. The cook still serves stew that defies analysis. Life in the monastery moves forward, even if half the people in it are horizontal. You pass Brother Petrus's desk on the way to the cloister. His manuscript is still open, mid-sentence. You read the line he was copying, "Deliver us from evil." You whisper, "Amen," and keep walking. Back at your desk, you sharpen your quill. Not because it's dull, but because it gives you 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds where you're not copying saints' names, or checking for blotches, or holding in a cough. Then you start again. You write Ave Maria and pause. There's a mark on the vellum. You squint. Ink or... Nope, just ink, thank God. Your candle flickers. Your hand steadies. You write on, because in sickness and in health, the book of hours waits for no one. Latin. Glorious, endless, brain-nodding Latin. You stare down at the line you've just written, quia fecit mihi magna, qui potens est. You know what it means. Kind of. You've copied it so many times, the translation has dissolved into something more like feeling than language. Something about might and greatness, or greatness because someone's mighty. Either way, it's technically correct. Probably. Latin isn't a language anymore. It's a lifestyle. A test. A slow, papery labyrinth built from declensions and participles, and that one verb tense that no one's used since Charlemagne tripped over a prayer bench. You're halfway through conjugating esse in the future, perfect subjunctive, and wondering if that's even a thing real people ever needed. You glance at Brother Hugo's page. He's conjugating ire. You hope he does go preferably to a distant priory where they don't pronounce every AE like a sheep having an epiphany. Your Latin is good, mind you. You've trained for this. Years of drills, declension charts tattooed onto your soul. But even now you still sometimes look at a line and ask yourself, is that the subject, or did I just call Saint Benedict a washing bowl? It's not just the grammar, it's the abbreviations. Oh, sweet mercy, the abbreviations. Scribes had to cram a lot of holiness onto a very expensive piece of vellum, so they got creative. Instead of Dominus, you get a Dignus. Instead of Spiritus, just a random SPS. And God help you if someone decides to use Tironian notes, a kind of medieval shorthand that makes modern algebra look like doodling. You have a glossary. It's not helpful. You keep going. You write Exi Ancilla Domini and stop. Wait. Is that ancilla or anguilla you've accidentally called the Virgin Mary an eel before? You don't want to do it again. You scrape. Correct. Move on. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly understood all the Latin they wrote, or simply learned to mimic it like liturgical parrots. The answer seems to be yes, but only barely. And when they didn't know, they guessed. You can see the guesswork in every shaky verb ending and squiggly abbreviation drawn like someone was holding in a sneeze. You reach a passage in Ecclesiasticus, never your favorite. The phrasing is dense like theological porridge. You write slowly, deliberately, making sure every Q has its tail, and every X doesn't accidentally look like a cross. Your hand slips. You turn exultavit into exultavit. You stare at the double V in horror. It's not even a word. It looks like a hiccup. You scrape. Again, you whisper a small Latin prayer, Domine miserere scriptoris tui. Lord, have mercy on your scribe. Outside the wind howls. The candle leans like it's gossiping with the quill. You press on. Every once in a while, a Latin phrase strikes you, not just for its rhythm or symmetry, but for the truth tucked inside it. Like a sharp little blade of wisdom under all the pomp. Today it's fiat voluntas tua, thy will be done. You murmur it as you write, not just because it's part of the text, but because, if you're honest, it's become your own quiet chant. Let this quill behave. Let this ink not blot. Let my back survive another page. Thy will be done. You glance up. Brother Jerome is frowning again. You're not sure if it's the Latin or just his face. You refocus. Another phrase, peccavi nimis cogitatione verbo et opere. You've seen it 1,000 times, but today it hits different. I have sinned greatly in thought, word, and deed. You consider scratching out the greatly, but no, you leave it. You're not even halfway through today's section when you come to a passage with a particularly thorny syntax. It starts with quonium and ends in a full-on grammatical riot. You try to parse it, you fail, you write it anyway. You imagine someone centuries from now, squinting at your page. What does he mean by this structure, they'll say? Is this some kind of rhetorical device? No, it means you were tired, and Latin is hard, and you had cabbage soup for breakfast, and you had to finish 4 more pages by supper. You're hunched over your desk, slogging through the life of St. Agnes, when a low, joyous chuckle bubbles up from the far end of the scriptorium. It cuts through the usual soundscape quills, scratching ink pots, clinking the occasional stifled sigh like a bird flying straight into a stained glass window. You look up. Brother Theobald is at it again, the illustrator. He's working on an illuminated page for the same manuscript you've been toiling over for days, weeks maybe. But while you break your back, parsing Latin conjugations and praying not to misspell virginitatem, he's over there giggling like a schoolboy, drawing fish with crowns and demons wearing fashionable boots. You squint across the room. He's painting a unicorn, in a scene where there are supposed to be Czechs, notes, Romans executing a martyr. A unicorn. You feel rage. Holy, silent, dignified rage. The kind monks bottle up and let out through prayer and petty marginal notes. Because here's the truth, illustrators got all the fun. While you're chained to text, making sure every S doesn't look like an F, and that your Latin doesn't invoke unintentional heresy, the illustrators are over there, playing divine doodle games with gold leaf and vivid blue lapis paint. Historians still debate whether illuminators and scribes worked closely or separately. The answer from your perspective is closely enough that it hurts. Because when Theobald makes a mistake, it becomes art. When you make a mistake, you spend 20 minutes scraping it off and praying for a do-over that doesn't shred the parchment. You dip your quill in the ink. You're copying a miracle where St. Agnes tames a lion with her innocence. You glance at Theobald. He's literally painting a lion cuddling with a girl who has halo-shaped bangs. It's adorable. It's annoying. It's perfect. You hate it. You try to focus on your work. Beata Agnes Virgo et Martyr Flamma, ignis non sensit. It's a good line, poetic, powerful. You even dare to embellish a capital B. Not a full-on illumination, just a tasteful swoop. It immediately smears. You scrape. Again. Meanwhile, Theobald is gilding the mane of his overly affectionate lion with real gold leaf. He's got brushes the size of angel eyelashes and an expression of smug serenity, usually reserved for people who've just seen Visions of the Virgin. You mutter something uncharitable and return to your text. Perfidem et castitatem. You briefly consider accidentally knocking over his paint pot. But no, that would be a sin, possibly a crime. And let's be honest, you'd still have to finish your work afterward with extra penance. The funny part is that when people see these books centuries from now, they'll fawn over the illustrations. Oh, what exquisite work, what detail, what imagination. No one will notice your even lines, your careful Latin, your calligraphy holding everything together like a spine. They'll notice the rabbit jousting a snail in the corner. They won't notice the 36 times you rewrote the word ecclesia. You look down, your own page is clean, centered, neat, boring. You sigh, and then you add a flourish, just a little one. A tail on the letter G that curls into a spiral. It's nothing really, but it's yours. And maybe, just maybe, someone will notice. Then again, probably not. They'll be too busy admiring the unicorn. You glance over again. Theobald is now outlining a bishop with wings. You're not even sure that character exists. Probably invented. Symbolic, he'll say, if asked. Mystical. You write another verse and contemplate drawing a tiny dagger in the margin beside it. Symbolic. Mystical. By the time you finish the page, Theobald is already working on the border. It has grapes and squirrels, possibly a griffin playing a lute. You're not even mad anymore. just tired, but you don't stop. Because while Theobald may get the colors, the spectacle, the praise, you are the spine. Without your lines, his lions are just floating cats, and you remind yourself every great manuscript needs its invisible hands, the people who draw the gold halos. They get the applause. The people who spell martyrium correctly every single time. They get the satisfaction. And maybe that's enough. You shift again on the stool, which responds with the same creaking groan it has made every day for the last 2 years. It's the kind of sound that carries judgment, the kind that says you chose this life even though you absolutely didn't choose. Scoliosis by candlelight. Your back is on fire. Your shoulders feel like they've been carrying the relics of all 12 apostles. Your neck has stiffened into one fixed angle, perfect for scrutinizing tiny letters, terrible for seeing anything else. When you stand eventually, you'll look like a question mark, asking why. You stretch very slowly, eliciting a dozen satisfying cracks and one slightly alarming pop. Brother Hugo winces at the noise. You nod at him like you've just completed a small exorcism. There's no denying it anymore. Your body is turning against you. Writing for 16 hours a day, hunched over dead cow skin, with a quill made from the molted feather of a bird that probably resented you. This is not a health regimen. You touch your lower back and wince again. It's a deep ache now, the kind that makes you suspect some long-forgotten vertebra has simply given up and moved out. Historians still argue whether monks suffered long-term damage from scribal work. There's no firm consensus, but if they had MRI machines in the 13th century, every monastic scribe would have looked like a medical parchment disaster. You try to realign your posture like the abbot says during morning instruction. Sit upright as if you carry the Lord in your spine. You attempt it for 3 seconds. Then you collapse back into your natural C-curve. The Lord will just have to ride side saddle today. You return to your page. You're copying a passage from Liber Miraculorum. You reach a section about a man who was miraculously cured of his deformity after prayer and fasting. You laugh just once, not a joyful laugh. The laugh of someone who knows that if a miracle doesn't intervene soon, you'll soon be shaped like one of Brother Theobald's misshapen angels. You adjust your seat again. The wooden surface is slick from months of wear, and let's be honest, occasional tears. You try to fold a piece of cloth beneath you for support. It slips immediately. Of course it does. There's a sharp twinge in your right shoulder, the same one that tightens every time you do flourished capitals. You name the pain Saint Spasmus. He visits daily, usually around matins. The worst part. The abbot says suffering is edifying, that each ache is a reminder of our mortal state. That pain is the ink of humility. You'd like to suggest that maybe humility could be achieved with less joint damage. Still, you write on. You reach the end of the miracle story and pause to crack your fingers. Your joints sound like dried twigs snapping under the weight of theology. You sip your tea. It's cold, possibly cabbage-infused, possibly just sadness in liquid form. Outside bells chime for sext, midday prayer. You contemplate skipping it in favor of lying flat on the cold flagstones. But last time you did that, Brother Jerome said you looked like a heretical corpse and suggested burial. You stand. Every muscle protests. You whisper to your knees, hang in there, lads. They do, but barely. Prayer comes and goes. You kneel, you rise, you kneel again. Your back screams. You mentally assign each vertebra its own saint. Saint Lumberius, Saint Pincheticus, Saint Orthopedia, patroness of posture. Back at your desk, you steel yourself for another round. This time you're working on a sermon. The handwriting must be flawless. The abbot is watching. You feel his presence hovering near, the back of the room. Not moving, just existing. Loudly. You try to sit straight again. You fail. You write slowly, painfully. Beati qui audiunt verbum Dei. Blessed are they who hear the word of God. You add, and who can do so without their spine resembling a coiled eel. Not in ink, just in your thoughts. You're not suicidal. Brother Hugo cracks his neck in sympathy. You exchange glances, an unspoken bond forged in the fires of shared lumbar torment. You try to distract yourself by counting the letters in each line, then the lines on the page, then the pages in the stack. This brings you no comfort. The stack is still very tall. You press on, because what choice do you have? You are a scribe, a human hinge with a quill and a mission. You are bent but unbroken. Mostly, you finish the folio gently, carefully, and you sit back. One page closer to sainthood, or sciatica. You rest your quill for a moment and let your gaze drift toward the window, narrow high, barely more than a slit in the stone. Outside the world continues. Birds maybe, wind in the grass, the occasional merchant's cart creaking by. Life, movement, air that isn't made of ink and boiled cabbage. And you're still here, still copying, still stuck. You watch two friars walk through the courtyard, below brown robes billowing as they head toward the gate. They laugh, you squint. Are those packs they're carrying travel gear? Of course, they're leaving on a preaching journey, again. You feel a pang, not of envy exactly, but of longing. That was supposed to be your path once. You'd dreamed of walking village to village, delivering sermons under trees, debating theology with other learned men, sleeping under the stars, with nothing but scripture and the occasional goat. Instead, you were cursed with tidy handwriting, and that was that. You got assigned to the scriptorium where dreams go to die under a mound of vellum and the smell of ink. You sigh. It's not that you hate the work. In fact, part of you is proud of the pages you've produced. You've preserved wisdom, transmitted scripture, shaped the voice of eternity. But still those friars get fresh air. You get paper cuts. You remember when one of them returned from a mission in the south. He'd seen the sea a moving, endless thing that didn't resemble a blank page or a cold bowl of lentils. He spoke of color and sound of languages you'd never heard of a woman who danced in a village square just because she could, and you found a beetle inside your inkwell that same day. It blinked at you. You blinked back. Historians still argue whether scribes saw their lives as confinement or calling. You think the answer depends on the day. Today it feels like a prison. Tomorrow it might feel like purpose. Or Tuesday. Tuesday's usually neutral. You return to your manuscript. The saint you're copying once converted an entire town, using only a psalm and a roasted fish. You try not to take that personally. Brother Jerome passes behind you. He's humming again, some low chant that always seems vaguely judgmental. You consider stabbing him with your quill, lovingly, as a brother. The friars disappear from view. You wonder where they're going. Maybe to Toulouse, maybe to some mountain town with hot bread and curious children who want to hear stories of saints and miracles. You copy a sentence about divine obedience. You clench your jaw. Because here's the thing, you are obedient. You didn't argue when you were assigned to this life. You didn't resist when they handed you the pen. You accepted, you sat, you wrote, you have been faithful. And yet, the wind outside carries laughter. You haven't laughed in a week. Not a real one. Not since Brother Theobald accidentally spilled gold leaf into the soup and half the table sparkled for 3 days. That was a good moment. You keep going. The parchment beneath your hand is warm from the candlelight. Your fingers ache, but you find a rhythm. Again, a small comfort in the repetition. There's a certain peace in it, like rowing a boat across a dark, silent lake. One stroke at a time. No storm, no destination, just motion. You write a line about St. Julian forgiving his betrayers. You try to do the same with your own bitterness. You think of the friars again, sleeping on cold floors, dodging accusations of heresy, facing bandits and disease, and the daily burden of converting stubborn farmers. And maybe this isn't so bad. No cold floors, no angry villagers, just ink vellum and a steady, quiet life. You look at your work. It's beautiful, truly. Even Brother Hugo said so once, and he gives compliments like a monk gives up his last piece of cheese. Rare, risky, probably involves penance. You trace the edge of a flourish. You smile faintly. Maybe those friars change lives, but you preserve them. You write on, and for now that's enough. You're halfway through a particularly tedious homily when you notice it again. The faintest outline, tucked into the left margin of the previous page, drawn with the light touch of a master sneak. It's a donkey, but not just any donkey. It has a nose that looks a lot like yours. You freeze. Then you squint. Next to the donkey, a scribe. Also suspiciously familiar. Same bald spot, same slightly bent posture. And oh yes, there's a tiny banner above it that reads in very neat Latin scripture stultus. The foolish scribe. You clench your teeth. Brother Theobald. It has to be him. You glance over. He's pretending to be deep in concentration, shading an ornate S with the kind of smug serenity only a man who just doodled you as livestock could manage. He doesn't look up. You breathe in, out. Consider revenge. Consider sainthood. Settle somewhere in the middle. This isn't new. Scribal pranks are as old as the scriptorium itself. Marginal jabs, subtle insults, the occasional illuminated middle finger hidden inside an ornamental vine. Historians still debate how widespread it was. You don't. You know, you live it. Last year, someone replaced a passage about divine grace with an exact copy of Brother Jerome's morning complaints. He didn't notice for a week. The abbot called it a test of humility. You called it Tuesday. You keep writing, but now you're plotting. You flip to a blank margin on the current folio. You lean close eyes flicking left and right like a criminal in a confessional. Then you draw. Just a few lines, a quick sketch, a monk with an impossibly large nose, a scroll labeled Ars Inflata, the inflated art. You smile. You're careful not to overdo it. You still remember the time a novice tried to draw a fox dressed as the abbot. The novice ended up scrubbing floors for 4 months. And floors, unlike vellum, don't forgive. You return to your text, copying another miracle. This one involves a chicken, a falling roof beam, and divine intervention that somehow involved an egg. You try not to dwell on it. You add a comment in the margin, unclear, possibly symbolic, or hungry. There's a rhythm to this dance of passive aggression. You can't speak it aloud. You can't roll your eyes during prayers. But you can slide a sardonic sketch between psalms and call it decorative. You remember one folio years ago where every marginal figure wore a tiny hat. Another where a sequence of mice, spread over 20 pages, slowly staged a coup against a bishop. You're still not sure who drew that one. Possibly Brother Thomas. possibly the Holy Spirit with a sense of humor. You glance over at Theobald again. He looks up just briefly, smiles, winks. The battle continues. You're not even mad anymore. This is what keeps you sane. The jokes, the games, the secret language of boredom turned beauty. It's how you push back against the monotony, how you make each page a little more yours. The abbot wouldn't approve, but the saints might. Surely even Saint Augustine got bored once in a while. You imagine him doodling Roman helmets in the margin of his own confessions. You write another line, Et Spiritus Domini replevitium. The Spirit of the Lord filled him. You fill your margin with a cat chasing a beetle. Just balance, really. You consider adding a snail joust. Classic, maybe next folio. Brother Jerome walks by, inspecting pages. You quickly slide your hand over the donkey sketch. He nods at your work, pauses, sniffs, says nothing, moves on. You exhale, then look down. You've dripped a dot of ink in the shape of a duck. You add feet, a beak, boom, intentional. You write on, because while the margins might be mischief, the mischief keeps you human. It starts with a gust of wind, not a holy wind, not the metaphorical breath of God. Just a very real, very rude draft that blows in through the cracked window and like fate-wearing sandals sweeps across your desk. And there go your folios. You watch in a mix of horror and detached surrender as 30 neatly stacked pages take flight. Some glide, some spin, one somersaults off your desk with the acrobatic grace of a martyred gymnast. They scatter like leaves touched by divine chaos, landing in every corner of the scriptorium. Brother Hugo yelps as a page slaps him across the face. Brother Jerome, ever the dramatic, makes the sign of the cross and mutters, Tempestas est signum, it's not. It's poor window management. You remain still for a moment, and then it hits you. They're out of order, all of them. There are no page numbers, no tabs, no bookmarks, just your notes in the upper margin abbreviations you were sure you'd remember later. You didn't. Of course you didn't. You rise slowly, the full weight of what's just happened, settling into your spine like a sack of wet psalms. You begin gathering the pages, each one a riddle. You flip through, here's the martyrdom of Saint Eugenia. Next to it, the death of Saint Apollonia. But wait, those were separated by 6 other saints and at least one miraculous fish resurrection. You sigh. Historians still argue how scribes organized loose folios before binding. Some say wax seals, others mention leather ties. Most agree the best method was not letting them fall all over the floor. You start the slow, meditative task of reordering, holding one page in each hand, comparing script, spacing the emotional residue of each saint. This one feels like an early martyr. That one smells like despair. You build a new stack. Brother Thomas offers help. You decline. He means well, but he once alphabetized a list of martyrs by cause of death. You find a page you forgot you wrote. It's good. Strong letters, solid ink work. You pause, admire it, then realize you have no idea where it goes. You stare at it. Saint Walburga. Where were you supposed to go, Walburga? You flip through. Another page mentions her. You try to match them like sad theological puzzle pieces. This is your punishment, not for pride or laziness, or even that time you sketched a unicorn riding a bishop. No, this is for every time you said, I'll sort it later. Now is later. You find the first page. That's something. The introductory sentence, Hic incipit vita beatorum martyrum. You align everything around that. Build outwards, slowly, carefully. Each recovered folio has a story, a smudge, a marginal note. One has a suspicious paw print, probably Gregory the Rat's editorial contribution. You sigh again. You catch Theobald watching you. He raises an eyebrow. You nod grimly. He knows. He's been here. We all have. There's a deep silence as you reorder the final stack. It's taller than you remember. Or maybe you're shorter now. Hunched, humbled. You return to your seat newly chastened. You press down the folios with both hands. Whisper to them like wild animals, stay. You consider adding tab small vellum flags, maybe a sewn thread. Something. You don't. Because that would be wise, and scribes are nothing if not consistently overconfident in their memory. You dip your quill, start again. 2 lines in a breeze wafts through the scriptorium again. You tackle your folios with the speed of a man who has learned. Disaster averted. Barely. You straighten the stack, adjust your inkpot, and return to your rhythm. Writing, after all, is about order, sequence, flow. But every now and then, you just have to wrestle the chaos back into submission, 1 page at a time. You begin your line with a flourish, a clean confident in nomine domini, and your quill glides like it finally respects you. The ink flows true, the parchment behaves, and for a moment you feel like you might just finish this manuscript in peace. Then the abbot coughs. It's not a regular cough, it's the cough. The someone has died cough. You glance up, slowly, and sure enough, Brother Bernard's desk is empty. He's been sick for days, but now it's official. Someone else has drawn a black cross on his last page. His quill is neatly laid across the top, a subtle signal. You don't ask questions. You just add his folios to your stack, which is how you find yourself moments later, holding a page that cuts off mid-sentence. No graceful ending, no final flourish, just a dangling participle and a smear of ink, like he was interrupted by the very hand of God, or at least a particularly rude coughing fit. The line ends at spiritus eius, and his spirit what? You stare at it for a long time. Then you flip through the remaining pages, hoping he picked it back up elsewhere. But no, that was the last thing Brother Bernard ever wrote. 1 half sentence. 1 final breath captured in iron gall. Now it's yours to finish. This happens more often than you'd think. Monks die, manuscripts don't. Someone has to step in, pick up the line, stitch the thought, resurrect the rhythm. It's not just a job, it's a kind of silent communion with the departed. You dip your quill, you hesitate, you don't want to get it wrong. It's spiritus eius me gravit ad dominum. And his spirit went to the Lord. You let the quill linger at the end of the line. No flourish this time, just silence. Historians still debate how scribes felt about completing others' work. Some say it was an honor. Others believe it was a burden, especially when the handwriting changed too noticeably, or the replacement wasn't nearly as careful. You do your best to match his style. His ES looped high, his SS leaned like tired men. You mimic them with quiet reverence. You write on. The next page starts anew. Different section, different voice. Your own again, and it feels odd, like waking from a dream. You write slower now, more deliberately. You're aware of every stroke. Every sentence has a weight. You wonder how many others have written until their last breath. How many hands passed down this work? You think of their quills, their backs, their silence. You make it through another page, then another. You pause to rest your hand. You look around the scriptorium. Theobald is asleep over his inks. Jerome is still humming. Hugo is scratching his beard with the wrong end of his pen. Life continues. You glance at the folio with Bernard's last line. You whisper, "Rest easy, brother. I've got this." And then you write on, Because this is what scribes do. You don't get a name, you don't get a statue. You just finish the sentence. And now as the last line dries and the candle burns low, you set your quill down gently, reverently, beside the quiet stack of folios that has taken days, weeks, maybe months of your life. You sit back the ache in your spine, softening just a little, no longer demanding but merely present. The scriptorium is hushed. Even Brother Jerome has fallen silent. Outside the wind hums through the trees like a lullaby in Latin. The flame at your desk flickers its last, casting a golden sheen across the letters you've so carefully pressed into time. You breathe. In the dim light, every blot, every flourish, every barely visible note in the margin now feels like a part of something bigger. Something that will outlast your hands, your body, your name. You were not the author, no, but you were the vessel, and in that there is peace. Your hands rest in your lap. For the first time in hours, you simply listen to the creak of old wood, to the rustle of vellum as it settles, to the quiet echo of lives lived in ink and devotion. The quill may rest, but the words remain. And now you may rest too. Close your eyes. Let the flicker of candlelight fade. Let the voices of saints and scribes dissolve into the stillness. You've written enough for today. The margins are quiet now. And somewhere in the corner, Gregory the rat curls up beside a stack of saints and sleeps without judgment. Good night, scribe. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.